commence today's proceedings in celebration of Marie's life, we wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we stand, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging.
Welcome to you all. Welcome to our guests here at the New, and welcome to those of you who are watching on the internet. This is being streamed, and because of the stream, you might notice that the videos are a tiny bit out of sync, but that's what we've got. My name's Kim Nucky. I'm very pleased to be here to help to celebrate the life of Marie Armstrong.
And I'm Roseanne McNamara, President of New Theatre, but mainly here today, like you, to remember a very special woman.
Marie died on October the 5th, 2020, Labor Day, and I'm sure she'll be pleased that we're remembering her on May Day. In the last few weeks of her life, Marie had been in and out of hospital. Her breathing was laboured, but she still managed, a week before she died, to come here to see the play Neighbourhood Watch. A constant stream of friends had been ringing her to see how she was going, and a call to Marie followed a regular pattern. The phone would ring a few times, answered with an abrupt, "Armstrong." I spoke to Marie a couple of weeks before she died. She said, "I'm having trouble breathing, you'll have to do most of the talking." And then she proceeded to dominate the conversation for the next 10 minutes. When the news of her death filtered out, there was much surprise among her friends. Les Aspel, is Les Aspel with us today? I'm not sure if he is. He wrote, "We thought you were immortal." And perhaps she is. She had a zest for life with friends of all ages, and she had a great inquisitiveness about what made people tick. Most of Marie's ashes were scattered last year at Callan Park, as she requested. The family had strong work associations there. And just this morning, the remainder of her ashes were laid beneath the stage here at New Theatre. We put more of them stage left than stage right. So beware, she's listening.
Many people have helped to put this celebration together, and their names are listed in the programs you have, but we'd like especially to thank Marie's executors, Marty O'Neill and Barbara Finch, and also Gar Jones, who have taken such loving care of Marie's estate. We can't possibly cover Marie's life in the detail it deserves, but what we can do is pay tribute to a remarkable woman and celebrate some of the highlights of a life that touched so many. As much as possible, we would like Marie to tell her own story in her own words, and we're pretty sure that's exactly how she would have liked it.
So, who was Marie Armstrong? Most of us knew and loved her in her adult life. But what made her that woman? Why don't we let her tell us?
My family was very working class, very non-political. I mean, it was had been married many years before I found out, for instance, that my grandfather had been in the 1890s shearing strike and had been quite a militant. It was about this time also I found out that one of my mother's brothers was a member of the Left Book Club, which was raided by the police, people who had left-wing books, and books were destroyed.
And here is Marie's grandfather, Nichols, who had been in the shearing strike. And that's grandmother Nichols with him.
Marie was born Olive Marie in Rozelle on the 28th of June 1928 to Beatrice Rose Nichols, always known as Babs. Marie always remained close to her mother's family. She remembered being told that Babs' first marriage was a violent one. So, of course, when Babs eventually walked out, she was divorced for desertion.
Marie was brought up as an only child, although she knew she'd once had a brother, Fred. But one day, Fred was taken on an outing by his father's family and never returned. He was brought up by his paternal grandmother and an aunt, and Marie always thought he died. Then, 70 years later, with the help of Lynn Collingwood, Marie traced her long-lost brother and also to reunite him with his mother, Babs. Marie recalled.
He paid his first visit and it was a great success. Mum didn't cry but was shaking, and immediately they embraced and kissed. And it was a moving experience for all of us. He was told nothing about the circumstance of being taken from his mother.
This is Marie with Fred near Newcastle at a memorial to the coal miner killed in the 1929 Rothbury riot. Marie was never one to pass up a left-wing photo opportunity. Fred died in 2001, 3 years after this reunion. Following her divorce, Marie was about 4 when Babs married widower Dick Stonehouse, a motor driver and carrier. Marie took the surname of her stepfather, becoming Marie Stonehouse, and the family moved from the relative comfort of Rozelle to a pretty rough part of Sydney, Darlinghurst.
Marie's formal education began at Darlinghurst Public School. That's her 4th or 3rd from the left in the ringlets. Why ringlets? Because in the early 1930s, Shirley Temple was all the rage. Can you tell which one is Marie? Yes, of course, she's the one on the right. Every mother wanted to have a daughter like Shirley, so at age 6, Marie was enrolled in dancing class. Dancing would become an important part of her future career, and she loved it all, from the basic classes to the exhilarating hours on the skating rink to the liberating free-form work of Margaret Barr.
I guess you could say I had a stage mother. She wasn't a pushy professional type of stage mother, but she did see her daughter as a performer, and when I was a kid, Shirley Temple was sort of, if she hadn't arrived on the scene, she was ready to bounce on the scene. And my mother was very keen for me to learn dancing, and took me to a studio in Oxford Street, right at Taylor Square, the Kath Hanbury studio of theatrical dancing, I think it was called. And as it turned out, I think it was probably a very, very good thing that she did for me. I was extremely shy. Unfortunately, it was the sort of studio that I had a classical ballet training, but also the theatrical side. So I was what we used to call, I did toe, tap, and ballet. So that was on point, and learning about, you know, sort of toe dancing, as it was called in the studio. Tap dancing, of course, was very, very important. And all sorts of other dancing. I mean, for instance, you know, if you asked me to get up and do a horn part, even now, I can do the basic horn part steps. I could do a basic Spanish-style step. So I really came out of that many years in that studio of having a very good overall ability to turn on a different style of dancing. Well, of course, I didn't. Of course, there was no way you'd know how valuable that was going to be in later years.
Why don't you go with fashion sense? Putting on the ritz. Different types who wear a day coat, pants with stripes, and cutaway coats, perfect fits. Putting on the ritz. Dressed up
thank you to the dancing Maries, Susan Jordan, Suzanne James, Francesca Nagel, and Colleen Cook, dancer and choreographer. During the 1930s, Marie's artistic interests continued, ringlets intact, though the hair had been tamed by the time Babs took her to the Children's Hospital to have her tonsils out. By the end of the 30s, increasing numbers of children from war-torn Europe were enrolling at Darlow Public, and Marie learned that using words like refo and dago, common in the Australian vernacular, was not acceptable. Now that lesson almost certainly came from one of her teachers, Lydia Losciavo, a member of a cultured family from Italy who remained a lifelong friend. This is Marie and Lydia bushwalking in the snowy. When Lydia was dying, Marie wrote to her, saying,
"Hardly a day goes by when I am not reminded of what incredible luck I had in your finding and nurturing little Marie in our third-year class at Darlinghurst. You brought such a warmth to the knowledge you opened up for me. I hear myself saying repeatedly, I wouldn't be capable of having this conversation if it hadn't been for Lydia Losciavo befriending me at the age of 11.
As we all know, mentoring those around her would be one of the constant threads of Marie's life, and perhaps we have Lydia to thank for this.
By the age of 12, other things were changing for Marie. This is her at Manly in the latest fashion, a latex swimsuit. Whatever happened to them? And who cares?
Sadly, at this time, Dick Stonehouse was diagnosed with stomach cancer and was unable to work. He eventually died in the Liverpool men's home in 1940. And Babs was again penniless. The only asset Dick left Babs was his truck.
Before long, a fruiterer by the name of Yobber Smith bought Dick's truck and, as you can see in the photo, put his Canterbury address on it. He also began to woo Babs and succeeded. As Marie noted, there was no marriage this time, but they each told their families that they had married.
This led to big lifestyle change, from reduced circumstances in the inner city to economic security in Canterbury. But Babs and Marie found the move disconcerting. A new school, no friends, cast out into the sticks, as Canterbury was at that time, and a controlling stepfather. Now in her early teens, Marie dreamt of becoming a Tivoli girl. She appeared in pantomimes and concerts, but her stepfather arranged business college lessons for her, and he insisted that she learn to type. While this shattered her show business dream, it set her on a new course as a working woman. Marie once wrote,
I got a job when I hadn't quite turned 14 for a firm called Produce Importers Committee in Sussex Street. This is wartime, and that was a sub-state government department set up to handle, to invoice and pay all potato growers in New South Wales. I worked in that office for over 10 years.
She had a long working life as a bookkeeping operator and as a typist, including as secretary to Bert Chandler, whose newsletter printery published the communist newspaper Tribune and the Trot Guide.
Here she is at the printery with artist Yvonne Frankart, who also designed new theatre costumes and sets.
Her next long-term employer was the Amalgamated Metal Workers Union. Here is Marie with her dictaphone at the AMWU.
And with Carl Zwicky on the right, shortly, and the AMWU film unit.
She retired from full work with the AMWU at age 65 in 1993, and this is her cutting her retirement cake.
Throughout her life, Marie was a passionate supporter of workers' rights and unions, and I can't think of anyone more appropriate than our next guest to talk about this aspect of her life. He was president of the New South Wales Teachers Federation for a decade and was the deputy federal president of the Australian Education Unit. Most importantly, he brought his talent as singer, guitarist and musical director to a number of new theatre productions, including Reedy River. Please welcome Marie Mulheron.
Some fans out there.
Thank you very much. Look, I'm here to speak about a very specific part of a period of Marie's life. We all have known Marie as a theatre person, but of course she was much more than that, and this is just some few memories of Marie's work with the Union. She was a committed unionist all her life and a member of the Communist Party of Australia until at least the mid-80s. In 1972, the Amalgamated Metal Workers Union was formed. It was an amalgamation of the Australian Engineering Union, the Boilersmith and Blacksmiths Union, and the Sheet Metal Workers Union. What was extraordinary in these tumultuous times was this union became the largest union in Australia's history, 171,000 members at the time. It sent absolute shockwaves through the right and through the Tories. Indeed, Billy McMahon labelled Laurie Carmichael, who had become the Assistant National Secretary of the Union, as the most evil man in Australia. This only confirmed Billy McMahon's status as the most stupid fuckwit in Australia. So Marie went along to work for the evil Laurie Carmichael as what was then called secretary. You might call it personal assistant or EA these days, but it was a secretary at the time. Marie admits she got her job through the Communist Party of Australia's network. Laurie Carmichael, of course, later became president of the Communist Party, and he sought Marie out, knowing her skills as a secretary, typist, and other things, and he wanted someone he could trust politically to work with him. The other officials within the union strenuously opposed Marie coming into work for Laurie Carmichael. She recalls that they wanted Laurie just to share a secretary out of the pool and not to have his own PA. But Carmichael had big plans for the newly amalgamated union and needed someone who was going to be alongside him every step of the way. When she got there, she realised they had hidden the desk. The desk wasn't even available to her in the union office. Carmichael immediately went into bat for her and tore strips off anyone who questioned Marie coming to work for them. So while there were shaky beginnings, they settled down to a very close working relationship. They both actually had another pastime. They had both, as young kids, been ice skaters. So they connected on that level. So Marie went to work in the new building in Chalmers Street, the building that's still there, which is next door to the old Amalgamated Engineering Union building. Laurie Carmichael at the time was known for his love of classical music. Indeed, he was so expert in knowledge of classical music that he wrote some of the program notes for the Sydney Symphony Orchestra. And he immediately connected with Marie at a performance level in terms of a love of arts. And so when Laurie Carmichael decided that the Tom Mann Theatre had to be built in the building and had to be a fully fledged theatre with dressing rooms, he enlisted Marie and consulted with Marie and used her expertise in getting that theatre, which to this day is still used as a theatre. The only change now is it's got rake seating. At the time, Laurie Carmichael wanted to have flat floors so it could become an art gallery for workers to come and see art. For the opening, they commissioned Mona Brand, who you will know, many of you. Mona Brand was commissioned to write a new theatre kind of review to open the theatre. Of course, Laurie Carmichael thought, where do I get a director from? And Marie was enlisted to direct the show. The only problem is he didn't give her any time off to do it. So she was, every night, she was directing this. And if anyone's been involved in New Theatre Review, they are not easy things to put together. They're a lot longer than they are meant to be and quite complicated. The original idea was to have metal workers be the cast. And they were going to have an entire cast of men, it was going to be men, off the job to perform. That idea went by the way, as they auditioned and auditioned and auditioned and auditioned and auditioned, and I think one metalworker was finally allowed to, Marie allowed to take the stage. But these were tumultuous times, as I said earlier. Malcolm Fraser was in power. Marie tells the story of her office overlooking the Poolton Park there opposite Chalmers Street, and the organisers in the centre of the union being internal within the building with no external access. And she remembers saying, why have I, a mere secretary, got wonderful views of the park and the other officials? And Carmichael said they designed it that way because of ASIO surveillance. The high-rise buildings that were in Redfern had easy sight lines to the metalworkers' new building, and they knew they were being spied upon. In 1979, Marie was given the opportunity to go and work with and train with Stella Adler in Los Angeles. And for this, she needed many months' leave. Now, it was unheard of for secretarial staff in the union to be given any kind of leave, whether it was paid leave or leave without pay. It was just not part of their working conditions. Marie tells a story that Carmichael, when she approached him very timidly and said, I'd like a few months' leave, and Carmichael immediately agreed and went and had stand-up fights with the rest of the union officials to allow Marie to go and work in the States. Such was his commitment to the arts and, of course, his love of and respect for Marie. On the 2nd of February 1979, at 2:10 p.m, Marie took a phone call in the Metalworkers Union building. It was an anonymous phone call, and she took notes. She didn't take shorthand, she says, she took notes. "You're under surveillance. The situation is precarious. There are contracts out on you. Be careful. You'll need to have eyes in the back of your head. We know Carmichael drives a beige late model Holden. The fella we've employed has done nasty work. There are thousands of dollars at stake, and the multinationals are behind it." They're the notes that Marie took in this call. The police investigated. They couldn't trace the caller, of course. And 2 months later, Marie gets called to the reception in the metalworkers building, and Marie takes delivery of a funeral wreath addressed to Laurie Carmichael. Again, that couldn't be traced. Marie's on record as saying that it was an absolute privilege to work for Laurie Carmichael and the metalworkers, who treated her not as staff, but as a colleague and a comrade. And she's quite adamant that that respect was shown. I just want to finish with a personal anecdote. In 1976, I decided to write an article for the university paper about the Fraser's new industrial laws, which we look back on fondly now compared to the industrial laws we're enduring at the moment. But I remember ringing Marie up, because Marie had been a family friend of mine. My uncle, Pat Barnett, and Marie went back to the 40s and 50s and knew each other very well. So Marie had always been in my life growing up as a child. So I rang Marie up. I said, "Marie, can you get me in? I want to interview Laurie Carmichael." She lines up the interview, and I go into the metalworkers building. I get taken to his office by Marie, and he immediately starts, "I am the foremost Marxist theoretician in the Australian trade union movement," and stares straight at me. Marie at this stage is standing behind him, and she's given me that look as if to say, "Don't the fuck say anything." Just nod, to which I said, "Yes." And you know that grin that Marie Armstrong had out of the side of her mouth, that little wry grin, and she gave me the grin and walked out. But that's just some memories of Marie working for an extraordinary union. I just finished on this footnote that I'm sure Marie would note, when the union was 171,000 when she went and worked for it, it's now down to about 68,000, not because of a loss of membership through anything other than the loss of the manufacturing industries out of this country, and that's been the devastating impact. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Marie. It's really terrific. Got to check that I'm on the right page. Yes. By the time Marie was 18, she was working 9 to 5, and after work she loved to ice skate at the Glaciarium in Ultimo. That's not her, or nobody is her. At the time, she was seeing 2 separate guys, but we'll let her tell the story.
And they both asked me out on dates, and both of them asked me to see this play at the New Theatre called God Bless the Governor. And I didn't know what had struck me. And I can remember coming out and saying, but they all speak as though they didn't come out of the same sausage machine. That's exactly what I said. And when you went to New Theatre, people didn't dress up, but you realised that you were sitting watching a play with people from a lot of different walks of life. And then I was working in this office, and my best friend, Marie, she had a very close friend who was going with a young man who was studying law and who was a communist. And through that contact, went to see another play at the New Theatre. So it was like it was a gravitational pull. So what happened was we decided we would join New Theatre. And we went to the desk in the foyer. So we just said, yeah, we'd like to join the theatre, but none of us wanted to act. And her mouth must have fallen open, 3 females who didn't want to act. So that's how I started at New Theatre. And the first things I did, because I didn't want to act, was to type script stencils at work.
Naturally, she did start to absorb the world of the theatre, and she loved to tell this story, demonstrating what an awkward process it could be.
One very short story, I'll try and make it short, about Stanislavski. I heard this name, Stanislavski, and I got to be able to say it even. And at this period there was a family living next door to me at Canterbury, the Nicholas family. And the son of the Nicholas family was about 8 or 9 years older than me. And he was interested in acting and had a very fine tenor voice. And so he joined up with a little amateur group. And in fact, they had asked me at one stage to do a walk-on for them. And so I knew he was into theatre. He knew I'd joined this left-wing theatre because he was very, very right-wing. Lovely person, but right-wing, I started to realise later there was a difference. So I remember coming home very excited one night and meeting Jack and saying, guess who's a member of New Theatre, Jack? And he said, I don't know. I said, Stanislavski. And he was very polite. And he said, I don't think so, Marie. And I said, yes, he is. He's a member of New Theatre. He said, look, Stanislavski's, if he's not dead, he must be, he lives in Russia, Marie. I said, oh, are you sure? Well, of course, what had happened was I had met Stanislav Polonsky, who was a very prominent member of New Theatre and a very fine actor. And they used to call him Stanislav. And I used to hear Stanislav. So that was me then. Right, I tell this to students now because I think, I mean, I like to think that it's an indication of how far you can go after you leave school through influences and the people you meet and what have you. So that was the story of Stanislavski.
Not one to do things by halves, at about the same time that she joined New Theatre, Marie became a communist. Please welcome Deborah Bryan, accompanied by John Short at piano and Kim Short on guitar.
Thank you, Deborah and John and Kim. Marie sang that song in the review What's New, which opened this building as a theatre in 1973, and she was accompanied then by John Short. Marie was about 18 when she joined the Communist Party of Australia, the CPA. This was a bold personal step. Membership of the party was not without controversy, and soon there'd be an attempt to ban the party altogether. But as Marie said,
the statistics of the membership of the Communist Party after the war were very high because people had a desire for something better growing out of something that was pretty horrible. And there was a lot of hope in so many ways.
So, in 1952, when she was cast in The Candy Store, a play about a strike in a US department store, it combined all of her developing interests. At the time, the New took theatre onto the streets and to people who couldn't get to the theatre, like striking oil shale miners in Glen Davis. And what happened next would become one of Marie's fondest memories.
Yes, well, I suppose that's probably one of the most amazing experiences that I've ever had in my association with New Theatre. We were invited by the Miners' Federation to take a play down and entertain these people who were sitting down in the depths and the bowels. I was working in an office. I couldn't tell anybody in the office what I was doing. I don't think we were sworn to secrecy. I don't think it was that. It was just that I didn't have the courage in the Lithgow area, and it was cold. We didn't even know that we were going to be really allowed to go down. We just had to hang around and wait and hope everything was all right and hope we weren't going to be arrested. You know, there was all of this. So anyhow, obviously, the deal was done in whatever way, and then we were loaded onto these open trucks that they carried the coal. And so there we were, we went down and down and down, and it was dark, and it was, an incredible experience. You're very conscious of where you are. And we're on these trucks, and we get to the destination, and what it was a fork in the tunnels. And that's where we met the men that were sitting in. And of course there were these lovely greetings and they were pleased to see us. But what they had done was in the junction of these tunnels, the fork of the tunnels, they had already erected a stage for us, a wooden floor, out of the timber that they had around. They had manufactured a curtain out of their hessian. They had foreseen all of the needs. We're ready to go, or in dim lights, very dim light. And then when it was said, yes, we're ready to go, I'm going to cry when I say it. The blokes were sitting facing the stage, of course, and they had their helmets on and their lamps, and they turned their lamps on, and we performed in their spotlights. And that, till I die, I'll never forget that particular moment.
Some lights? Oh, thank you. In the 1950s, being a member of the Communist Party and/or New Theatre meant you were a person of interest to the Australian Security and Intelligence Organisation, as Marie was saying, ASIO. So, naturally, Marie came under surveillance as she attended Communist Party branch meetings and joined the party's seditious theatrical branch. She was frequently photographed by secret ASIO cameras in summer, in winter, participating in demonstrations, and conspiring with other dangerous New Theatre members, such as David Millis in the glasses and her husband John Armstrong. And this is Marie plotting with the Newcastle branch of New Theatre. Roseanne?
Oh, I'm on. Marie was delighted when ASIO released her files, and she was able to read how agents struggled with something as simple as a description of her. For example, over the various reports, her height grew from 5'4" to 5'7". In 1959, ASIO noted that she was
academically average, politically good, no apparent weakness, likes to be flattered, very fanatical in approach to communism.
And 5 years later, she was
a dominant personality, can express her ideas fluently, largely concerned in business affairs and theatre.
After years of surveillance, tapped telephones, intercepted mail and photograph reconnaissance, ASIO concluded...
Her main interest in the CPA was cultural, in particular the new theatre in which she was deeply involved for many years.
In 1979, when Marie sought a visa to visit the United States, of course the Americans checked with ASIO and were advised...
Her interest in the party lies mainly in the direction of the new theatre, so she's not a good communist.
But she got her visa.
Marie retained her Communist Party membership until 1985, and this is her letter of resignation, which reads, in part,
"This decision has been made after much painful soul-searching, not from any incident, but from a slow but firm lack of faith and confidence in the future of the party. It would be impossible and far too emotional to fully express my feelings in taking this step. I joined at the age of 18 and I'm now 57, a lot of years, the best of years. It was my membership in the party and the many fine comrades who helped and extended me that I owe a lot to. The tragedy is that this is no longer sufficient for me to retain my membership."
Meanwhile, back at the New, Marie was continuing to bring her talents out of the office and onto the stage, where her first appearances were primarily as a dancer. In 1949, she danced in Pot of Message. That's her on the right, with Nan Gow and Pat Lavelle.
And this is her centre stage in, it was her centre stage in 1950 in Press the Point.
This one, we're not sure where this is from, but we had to show it. It wasn't too long before Marie was being asked to do more than dance on stage.
And I had been a child singer-dancer, so I was used to performing, but I didn't join New Theatre to act. I just joined to help type scripts because that's what they needed. Very reluctant actor. I had to be coerced into doing some simple acting classes. No, I don't want to act, so why should I do classes? I said to people. They said, no, it'll be good for you, you know. One of the first things I did, I had this line, "Everybody's dying, Mrs. Rowan. People who never died before are dying." And that was what I had to say in this small role. The house brought the house down. It was a funny line, and apparently I did it well. And I'd come off stage thinking, oh, they laughed at me. And it was every time something happens like that, well, then your confidence builds up.
And here are a few of the plays that she would appear in over the next 50 years.
The Night of the Ding Dong in 1959 with Roger Coates.
And here's an unrecognisable Marie in The Land of the Teletap, a political parody of the Mikado. We think she's playing the treasurer because her name is Hytaxia.
In 1968, she appeared in the infamous America Hurrah, which was banned by the New South Wales Chief Secretary. That's her inside this oversized costume, playing the hotel keeper.
And in 1989, she appeared in The Life of Galileo with Frank McNamara.
And she was part of the original production of Reedy River, commemorating the shearers' strike of 1891. Reedy River had 11 productions at the New, and Marie was involved in almost all of them. This is the concert version she directed in 2002, and some of you may recognise yourselves. Marie's in the orangey yellow frock there, and some of you may be able to see the man right over on the left here on the wall, the fellow with the guitar. That's Maury Mulheron.
It wasn't until she retired from paid work that Marie finally accepted that maybe she could act, and she started to accept professional work. Her film and television appearances included The Roly-Poly Man, The Miraculous Mellops, All Saints, Changi, and Inspector Morse in Australia, which was filmed on location here in 1991. And here, of course, she is with the late John Thaw.
But it was back at the New that Marie worked ceaselessly, moving from one production to another. She acted, she danced, she became a choreographer, and then she tried her hand at directing.
After sort of doing a few straight plays, and I suppose alongside of that I was also accepting some responsibility to act as assistant to directors. Now, assistant to the directors is, I suppose, in film terms like a gopher, you know. But being an assistant director is a different thing. So I gravitated from secretary to the production, to assistant director, to assistant to the director, to assistant director. And so I worked with some very, very good people, learned a lot. Didn't always know what I was learning, but now looking back, I know that I learned a great deal. And then eventually comes the time when somebody says, well, how about, you know, now's the time. You've been assistant director to, you know, Eddie Allison, John Armstrong, Keith Gow. Well, now, you know, how about you? I don't know that I can. The first production that I accepted was Ballad of Angel's Alley. And John, my husband, whom I had assisted, he acted as the assistant to me. And but did it in a very good way. I mean, he really was letting me sort of carry it, but he was there to help. But that was a musical side, had choreography, which I did myself, and the acting. I had some very good people in it, which was a great help to a new director. So that was my first experience, but of course what I learned then was how much I didn't know. Of course I learned that. I mean, oh, you know, help, it was going up all the time. But nevertheless, I did it. And then the first straight, I did a workshop called The Death of Bessie Smith by Edward Albee. And then it was decided to have a major production which used that and another play. So then my workshop became a major production. That was very successful. Then the biggest straight play I did was Lorraine Hansberry's Sign in Sydney Bruce Steins Window, which was a tremendous success. And by this time, I mean, I knew then that I did have some talent for directing.
With her interest in issues, commitment to the organisations she worked with, and talent for direction, Marie quite naturally ended up on committees. This is her, third from the left, at a New Theatre National Conference in the days when there were 7 new theatres in Australia. And she was National Secretary for 14 years. For much of her time here, Marie served on the Management Committee of New Theatre, including long stints as President and Vice President, was a founding member of New Theatre Properties, and a presence on dozens of working parties.
This was Marie at a New Theatre Properties meeting with fellow members Lynn Collingwood and Mouse. All of us who have worked with Marie can attest to her fearlessness in tackling issues important to her. But determined as she was always gracious and good-humoured in either triumph or defeat.
We're not sure if this is triumph or defeat, but she's obviously having a good time. The New has brought many couples together over the years, and that's where Marie met Johnny Armstrong, who'd been directing at the New since the late 1940s. Johnny was a fellow communist, ex-RAAF corporal, goon show fan, serious punter, and lover of beer. Marie remembered.
Oh yeah, we met at New Theatre. I used to feel so sorry for him because he was always having trouble with girlfriends. He was 4 years older than me, but of course he'd been in the Air Force. He was like 40 years older than me, certainly in life experience. And I wore shorts because I was teaching tap. And Johnny would say later, I took one look at your legs and I thought, whoa. He wooed me, and he wooed me away from somebody who had nothing to do with the theatre, but had good family money behind him. And Johnny said, no, make up your mind. And so that was what I did. And so we were married, and I was 21 when I married Johnny.
They married in 1951 at St John's, Darlinghurst, then lived at Hunters Hill, then in flats at Rose Bay and Bondi Beach, before moving into Bab's Canterbury house. Marie later spoke about an issue that shaped the future for them.
One of the factors that held my constancy with the theatre was that when we were married, we found out we couldn't have a family. So that meant I didn't have to take time off from new theatre duties for the things I loved doing to raise a family.
Johnny and Marie continued directing and acting together throughout the Reds under the bed period of the Cold War, combining their commitment to theatre and social change. This is Johnny centre in the 1949 production of The Lion on the Square, and in 1959's The Biggest Thief in Town with Eddie Allison on the left. And of course they always enjoyed the company of mates. This is a 1952 fancy dress party with Marie being ogled by Groucho Marx, Johnny Armstrong. Then at the early age of 40, Johnny had a heart attack, followed by a series of strokes. Marie nursed him for the next 20 years until he died the day before Marie's 56th birthday. His last appearance at the New was in Yobbo Nout in 1981, directed by his wife. Marie and John had one particularly favourite song, and we'd like to invite George Hode to sing it, accompanied by John Short and Kim Short.
The days grow short. these precious days I'll spend with you.
Thank you, George and John and Kim. That was wonderful. Marie's second long-term relationship was with new theatre actor Phil DeCarle, who, like Marie, hadn't joined in order to act. Marie recalled,
Johnny and I were directing a production of Reedy River and we needed another bloke. Johnny said to this shy bloke, "You can talk, you can stand up, you can act." And it reminded me of my going to my first couple of acting classes, because he really didn't want to be at acting class.
Phil would go on to act, giving memorable performances such as this in the 1993 Sons of Cain, with John Keatley peeking over his shoulder. Marie and Phil's relationship endured, with Marie later saying,
"We were ex-lovers and mates for many, many years."
Here they are together at a new theatre fundraiser in 2005. As with Johnny, Marie nursed Phil as his health failed. He passed away in 2017, coincidentally on Labor Day.
I don't think any of us here would be surprised to hear that Marie Armstrong was awarded an Order of Australia medal. The only person who really seemed surprised was Marie.
I only found out because I got a letter in the mail alerting me to the fact that I was going to be nominated for an OAM. My attitude was, this was from the Queen, right? And I'm not a royalist in any way. But it's from the Queen, and I don't want anything from the Queen. I'm opposed to the Queen, see? So I'm thinking, well, I knew that there'd been other publicity previous years when people had sent back their medals, or, British, peers and things, who had refused, if they were left-wing, which I was, And, I was actually a member of the party still then, the Communist Party. So my attitude was I didn't want it, but I sort of had to tell my mother, because I was living with my mother. I sort of said to her, look, I've got this, and I want to let you know that I'm not going to accept it because I don't believe in it. She hit the roof and she said to me, I have put up with your politics all these years. I've had relatives that have been unhappy about you, and now you're being recognised by the government and the Queen, and you're saying you're not going to have it. And I've been putting up with this for all these years, and as far as I'm concerned, you're going to take it. It wouldn't be. And that was why I did.
Because her mum told her to. Marie's commitment to racial equality and fairness showed in the choice of plays she chose to direct. The Sign in Sydney Brewstein's window, with its themes of race and suicide. The Death of Bessie Smith, about racial segregation in the American South. And closer to home, The Death of Philip Robertson, based on transcripts of an inquest into an Aboriginal death in custody.
Marie was passionate about the Black Lives Matter movement, and she bequeathed the entirety of her estate for the establishment of an Indigenous scholarship for study in the arts at Sydney University, focusing on women undergraduates. It will be called the Marie Olive Armstrong Indigenous Scholarship.
Marie was especially fond of the poetry of Oodgeroo Noonuccal, and we'd like to invite Rachel Campbell to come back to the stage to read A Song of Hope in memory of Marie.
A Song of Hope. Look up, my people. The dawn is breaking, the world is waking to a bright new day. When none defame us, no restriction tame us, nor colour shame us, nor sneer dismay. Now brood no more on the years behind you, the hope assigned you shall the past replace. When a juster justice, grown wise and stronger, points the bone no longer at a darker race. So long we waited, bound and frustrated, till hate be hated and caste deposed. Now light shall guide us, no gold denied us, and all doors open that long were closed. See plain the promise, dark freedom lover. Night's nearly over, and through long the climb. New rights will greet us, new mateship meet us, and joy complete us in the new dream time. To our fathers' fathers, the pain, the sorrow, to our children's children, a glad tomorrow.
In order to increase Marie's legacy to Aboriginal education, her executors organised an online auction of some of her memorabilia. And if you have been a successful bidder, please collect your item from Marty or Gar after the show.
And there's another way you can help to increase her bequest. As we know, Marie loved a donation bucket. She was always encouraging us to have a bucket in the foyer so people could throw their loose change into it. So, looking good, Kim. We feel sure she'll approve of our having a bucket today in which you can throw your small change or large change to increase the size of her legacy. Now, we know a lot of people don't carry a lot of cash these days, so you can always make a donation through New Theatre or just throw your credit card in the bucket.
Before we go to the finale, we'd like to thank once again all of the performers that we've had on the stage here today. And our tech team, without this, certainly wouldn't have happened. It's amazingly complicated putting all this together. Thank you so much to Wayne Richmond, Martin Kelly, Beata Zanna and Mehran Mortazai. Thank you very much to Lynn Collingwood and Gar Jones for research and visual material. And also to Susan Jordan for preparing those gift bags as well as organising the dancing Maries.
Also, if you don't have to rush away at the end, which we're not quite there yet, Marty and Gar invite you to have a celebratory drink when we're finished, which they've kindly donated in Marie's honour. The drinks will be available at the bar, but due to COVID regulations, we're restricted in the number of people we can have in the foyer. No mingling in the foyer, right? But we invite you to bring your drinks back in here where you're free to chat and catch up with each other.
Well, it has been an honour for us to tell the story of this remarkable woman, a person of total commitment with a wonderful sense of humour and great at telling a yarn. Throughout her life, she learnt from and about other people, and she shared her wisdom by mentoring others. Above all, Marie Armstrong was an optimist who believed profoundly in the human spirit and believed utterly in the power of the arts to stimulate social change. As she once perceptively stated,
the arts have done more for equality and social justice than any political party has ever done.
As much as possible, we've wanted to tell Marie's story in her own words. So it's only right that we let her have the last word and show us how far she came from the days when she was a shy typist who thought Stanislavski was a member of New Theatre.
I can't emphasise enough the encouragement that I was given to express myself by so many people that I met in New Theatre. If I'd just been taken at face value, or just what I appeared to have, and that was a talent for typing, a talent for tap dancing, and left there, well, I would not be a member anymore. The kindnesses that were shown me by people taking an interest in me, I feel very guilty myself now when I don't have time to do the same thing with people that are around me. I'm always very cognizant of that fact. That I could have, I don't know what would have happened in my life if I hadn't had that, if I hadn't had the personal approaches made to me.
Thank you. Please get drink in the...
Good.
Thank you very much.